If Easton Arrows had a dating profile, what would the bio say?
Are you kidding? Nice, JD.
JD.
Single and ready to mingle. Not serious.
I keep thinking of really inappropriate things.
Of course you do. And I'm always sitting next to you for those too.
I'm thinking of your 4 things outside. No, you relate it back to a really
Safety,
clean
quality,
girl.
service, cost. All right, so in order to understand our pultrusion process, really I kind of have to show you how the rest of the market makes arrows. And I don't mean to, show this in a negative light. I'm just going to try to kind of show some of the things that they do, and then you'll be able to see through pultrusion how we're able to mitigate some of those things. But I'm definitely not saying that this wrap and roll method is a bad method. It just creates some negative consequences that would need to be addressed, and arrows get pretty expensive when those things are addressed in order to counteract what that's going to do for consistency from arrow to arrow, and even more importantly from batch to batch. So a standard arrow is going to start out as a piece of pre-preg fiber. So this is a sheet of carbon fiber. It's a unidirectional, or what a lot of people would call a zero layup, meaning all of the fibers follow the length of the shaft. Now this particular type is just one form of carbon, but on a certain wrap for an arrow, you could put as many different types of carbon in this as you would like. So it could go around the arrow twice. It would be this type of carbon, and the next layer would be built up in this same layup, and they would call that a jelly roll. So now they can put different pieces of carbon, basically like a sticker, where it's all pre-pregged, so it's pre-impregnated with resin. On this backside, you would pull off that sticker. But this is where you're able to get some really cool decor. So one of the potential drawbacks you could say for the pultrusion process is what it allows us to do aesthetic-wise. When you're doing a wrap and roll arrow, that last wrap, so I could add another little flag of carbon here that would go around, I could do something, an entire decal. The whole length of the shaft could be a decoration. It could be, I joked with Josh, it could be a picture of his mohawk. He told me the arrow wouldn't sell well, and I would probably agree. But you could do that as the last layer, literally a photograph of your dog or whatever you wanted it to be. It could be a weave. It could be, a number of different aesthetics you could have on that last final wrap as an aesthetic layer. And you see that on a lot of arrows today. And I would agree, a lot of those do look nice. So as you get this piece of pre-preg carbon, you peel off this back. Basically, as you peel that off, it's a sticker. This is pre-impregnated with resin, and you would grab then a mandrel. So this is a mandrel that I cut a little short to be able to put in my backpack. This is the length of a full mandrel. So I don't know, that's probably at least 36 inches, maybe even a little bit longer. You would put this down on the pre-preg carbon and roll it over the mandrel. Now, one thing important is to make one arrow, you have to have one mandrel. If you want to batch together, let's say 5,000 arrows at one time, you would need 5,000 different mandrels. Each mandrel has different tolerances, whether that's tolerance is straightness of the mandrel, whether that tolerance is the outside diameter of the mandrel. And you basically have 5,000 individual mandrels that are controlling the inside diameter of the arrow. Each one of those can vary slightly with machining tolerances. So once it's wrapped around, you end up with this, and that is an arrow. It's a tube. And I had them stop the cello process here so that you could see just that raw carbon wrapped around the mandrel. They then get cello tape. It's basically a tape that goes very, very tightly around the arrow or around the tube to then be able to put into an oven and cure the resin and keep everything together tight. So this is probably most notably seen in fishing poles. And this is this sample here. So it's now been cured, and they've taken off that cello tape that basically is just spiraled along there. And you can, I don't know if you'll be able to pick that up volume-wise, but you can feel it. There's some texture to that layer. Now what you have is a tube. It looks like a fishing rod. There's fishing rods that look just like that. The challenge you have now is you've obviously got to get rid of the cello marks, and you obviously have a seam wherever the carbon ends. So on this particular just zero flag, you would have one seam where it stops and where it ends. Now, if I were to have multiple flags, which is how most carbon arrows are made, with multiple different flags or multiple different types of carbon, including an aesthetic final wrap, could be that weave layer or something else, each one of those is a seam alongside that arrow. Each one of those seams is going to create spine inconsistency. So what you're going to find out there in the marketplace is a lot of people spine align the arrow. And they're trying to tell you where that stiffest part of the arrow is to get your arrows to respond as close to one another as they can. So rewinding back to where we were at with now the cello marks. This would now go into a grinder. And I have to choose, manufacturing this, whether I want to focus on stiffness, or what we refer to in archery as spine, and that's how much this arrow bends, or if I want to focus on the weight. And most manufacturers choose to manufacture to weight. So if I'm trying to build a 340 spine arrow, I know I've got to grind this to roughly 240 grains or whatever that amount is. And once it hits between 240 and 241 of grinding it, it drops it in a bucket. And you're basically making that to that weight. Now, the variable that can change now is how much material you had to grind off to reach that weight. And now the variability is going to be stiffness. So now you're going to get arrows responding differently because the spine is different from arrow to arrow or from lot to lot. The reason spine is so important is as you let that arrow go, basically it's how it's going to respond as it leaves the bow. So if one arrow in your dozen is a 340 spine, well, what if you have a 320 spine and a 310 spine and a 360 spine? Each one of those arrows is going to respond differently. And that's where, like I mentioned before, manufacturers will try to mark that part of the spine that's going to most consistently respond, like to give you a good grouping downrange. But it's why knock tuning is not necessary with Easton arrows. Because of our manufacturing process, the benefit of knock tuning is very, very minimal with our process. Whereas other manufacturers, it's a pretty big key to have consistency from arrow to arrow, especially once you go and screw a broadhead on the front of it, that now, as that arrow responds differently with stiffness, it's going to respond and shoot downrange differently. So, I hope that gives you a little bit better of an idea now as you see the pultrusion process of what makes Easton so repeatable. Whether you buy a dozen arrows today or, dozen 340-50s today, and in a year you buy another, they will be the exact same arrow with each fiber in the same place every time. There's no grinding. It's continuous. It's one mandrel to control the inside diameter and one die that controls the outside diameter with no grinding. Another common thing that they do is cut off the ends to remove wobble. When you see the pultrusion process, I often ask, and I do here shortly, where is the start and end of that arrow to cut off the wobbly ends? It's a continuous arrow that's 9,000 arrows long, well, between 7,000 and 9,000 arrows long, that there is there's one front and there's one back to the whole batch. So I hope that helps you understand what makes Easton a little bit different, what makes our arrows more repeatable. Thanks.